I signed the deed to the Grand Astoria 3 years ago. Every glass of overpriced champagne, every crystal chandelier, every square inch of Italian marble belonged to me. By the end of the night, the woman who called me a stinky backwater nobody was going to learn that I owned the ground she was standing on, and that my quiet success was about to cost her everything she ever wanted. The moment I walked into the grand ballroom, the words hit me, cutting through the low hum of conversation and the light tinkle of crystal. Vivian Hayes, my brother Spencer's perfect, designer-dressed fiancée, leaned in toward her bridesmaids, her voice a theatrical whisper that was clearly meant to carry. Oh great. The little backwater nobody is here. A wave of dismissive, hyena-like giggles followed from her perfectly coiffed friends. Vivian didn't even grant me a glance. I was so utterly insignificant to her, just an embarrassment that had crawled out of a tiny Virginia town to ruin the aesthetic of her meticulously planned engagement party. She had no idea. Absolutely none. What Vivian didn't know, what nobody in that glittering, self-important room knew, was that I, Audrey Reed, was the reason the Grand Astoria existed. Every silk damask drape, every piece of expensive silverware, the very foundation beneath her towering, costly heels, it all belonged to me. My company, Astra Hospitality, owned this hotel. And tonight, that whisper was going to cost her the future she thought she'd secured. I'm Audrey Reed, 31 years old, and I grew up in Oak Ridge, Virginia, a town so small the high school mascot was an overcaffeinated squirrel, and the only traffic jam ever recorded involved a runaway pig and a tractor. I left the minute I turned 18, and I never really looked back, not because I hated where I came from, but because my family had made it painfully clear there wasn't a place for me there. Spencer, 3 years my senior, was the golden child, the son who could do no wrong. Growing up, everything I attempted was measured against his achievements, and I always came up short. If I made the honor roll, Spencer had already been Student of the Year. If I landed a lead in the school play, Spencer had written the score. My mother, Lillian, had a special, distant way of looking at me that made me feel like a first draft, while Spencer was the finished, universally praised masterpiece. So I walked away. I took a bus to the nearest major city, carrying one suitcase, $200, and an ironclad refusal to fail. Everyone back in Oak Ridge assumed I was struggling. They pictured me scraping by, eating instant ramen in a minuscule apartment, which to be fair was absolutely true for the first 2 years. But they missed the part where I took a job as a cleaning lady at a boutique hotel. That job wasn't just a paycheck, it was my university. I watched. I studied. I moved up from housekeeping to the front desk, then to assistant manager, and finally, manager. I didn't waste a single penny. I invested meticulously, took calculated risks when they felt right, and learned to keep my mouth shut. By 28, I owned my first property. By 30, I had 3. Now at 31, I run Astra Hospitality, a growing company that operates 6 high-end boutique hotels across the East Coast. The Grand Astoria is my flagship, my pride, built and designed from the ground up, a testament to everything I'd fought for. The thing about building an empire from nothing is that you learn the power of being underestimated. People don't see the silent, relentless work. They only see the surface. So I never told my family. They never asked anyway, perfectly content to believe I was still the poor, struggling little sister who couldn't measure up to Spencer, their successful son in middle management at an obscure insurance company. The irony was so rich, it could have been served with the 5-star catering tonight. The invitation to Spencer and Vivian's engagement party arrived late. Of course, a clear guilt-driven afterthought, likely my mother's idea so she could boast to her friends that the whole family was present. I almost didn't come, but a stubborn pull, a morbid curiosity, brought me here. Had things changed? No. I stood in the entrance of my own hotel, wearing a pair of simple, perfectly tailored jeans and my favorite weathered boots. My outfit probably cost more than everything Vivian was wearing, including the engagement ring, but you wouldn't know it. Real money doesn't need to scream. And honestly, you can take the girl out of the farm, but sometimes you just can't take the farm out of the girl. Though you can definitely take her money straight to the bank. I saw my mother Lillian, holding court near the cascading champagne fountain, likely detailing Spencer and Vivian's wonderful, refined future. Spencer stood beside Vivian, beaming like a man who'd won the lottery, oblivious to the fact that he was holding a losing ticket. Vivian finally glanced my way, her smile as thin and sharp as a paper cut. She didn't recognize me as anything other than an inconvenience, a stain on her perfect evening. That was fine. Let her think I was a nobody. I had learned long ago that the best revenge is quiet, patient, and precise. It's watching people dig their own grave while they're too busy looking down on you to notice the shovel in their hands. I smiled faintly back, walked to the nearest bar station, and ordered a glass of sparkling water. Julian Vance, my general manager, caught my eye from across the room and gave a subtle, professional nod. Everything was running perfectly. Everything was perfect for now. Because in about 3 hours, Vivian Hayes was going to learn a very important lesson. Never underestimate the girl from the backwater, especially when she owns the ground you're standing on. The party was exactly what you'd expect from a woman whose primary personality trait was expensive. Ice sculptures of interlocking doves, a champagne fountain that bordered on absurd, and enough white roses to bankrupt a small florist. Julian's staff had done an exemplary job, which filled me with a quiet professional pride, even as I internally rolled my eyes at Vivian's aesthetic choices. I took my drink and melted into a quiet corner, observing. That's where my mother found me. Lillian approached with the air of a woman who had just smelled something rotten and was trying to locate the source. She scanned my outfit, her eyes lingering on my boots with visible distaste. She managed a strained, "Nice of you to make it, Audrey," a sentiment that clearly lacked conviction. Then came the inevitable question. Why couldn't I have worn something more appropriate? She stressed the word like it was a complex theological term, adding that the Hayes family was very refined. I offered the simple truth that I had come straight from work and hadn't had time to change, omitting the fact that work meant running a multi-million-dollar hospitality empire. Lillian sighed the sigh she had reserved exclusively for me since childhood, the sound of profound, tolerant disappointment. She instructed me to at least try to make a good impression on Victor and Penelope Hayes, and then retreated to her social obligations. 20 seconds of interaction, and I was 12 years old again, failing to meet an invisible standard. I spotted Vivian air-kissing her way through a throng of guests. Every gesture was calculated, every smile a measured performance. Her parents, Victor and Penelope Hayes, stood nearby, presenting a united front of polished affluence. Victor was a bulky man with a perpetually flushed face, and the kind of aggressive confidence that reeked of overcompensation. Penelope was skeletal, dripping with impressive, glittering jewelry that seemed slightly too big for her. They looked the part, they acted the part, but something about them felt wrong, like a forged signature on a masterpiece. Then Spencer saw me. My older brother ambled over, his expression still that of the slightly annoyed sibling who tolerated my presence. He said he was glad I came, though he clearly hadn't noticed my arrival. He asked if I'd properly met Vivian, gushing about how amazing she was. I simply said I'd seen her, keeping my true opinions locked down. Spencer nodded, his eyes already drifting past me to spot the next person he needed to greet. Some things truly never change. But then he dropped the bomb. "Guess what, ED?" he said, his voice lowering with a touch of pride. "Mom gave Vivian Grandma's necklace as an engagement gift. Wasn't that incredibly generous of her? Vivian absolutely loves it." The air actually left my lungs. Grandma's necklace. The antique silver locket that my grandmother had specifically promised to me before she died. She had held my hand, her eyes clear and sharp, and told me it was for me, her dreamer, her fighter, the one who would make something of herself against the odds. My mother knew this. Lillian had been in the room when the promise was made, and she gave it to Vivian anyway. I scanned the room and saw it, hanging around Vivian's slender, perfect neck, sparkling under the crystal chandeliers as she laughed at some joke. My grandmother's last tangible gift, my inheritance, my memory, was now a fashion accessory for the woman who just called me backwater nobody. The rage that surged through me was cold and quiet, a level of fury I hadn't felt in years. I excused myself from Spencer, mumbling something about needing to find the restroom. In the hallway, I passed Victor Hayes, his phone glued to his ear, his face a mask of pinched stress. He didn't notice me. He was too consumed by his conversation. I froze listening. We need this wedding to happen, he hissed into the phone. The Reeds have enough liquid capital to cover our situation. Just get us through the ceremony, and after that, everything will work out. He hung up abruptly, instantly plastering his oily salesman's smile back on his face before heading back into the ballroom. The Reed family had money. What money? My parents owned a nice house, but I knew for a fact it had a second mortgage because I had been secretly paying it off for the last 4 years. Spencer's salary was decent, but hardly enough to cover a situation for a major real estate mogul. There was no family fortune. So why did Victor Hayes think there was? And what exactly was their situation that required my family's capital? I spent the next hour watching the Hayeses like a predator watches its prey. Every staged smile, every firm handshake, every perfectly timed hollow laugh. Now that I knew there was a crack, I could see the whole performance falling apart. Victor kept nervously checking his phone, his jaw twitching with every new message. Penelope repeatedly touched her enormous diamond necklace, a gesture of deep-seated anxiety. And Vivian, beautiful, polished Vivian, had a desperation in her eyes that had nothing to do with the excitement of a wedding and everything to do with survival. The pieces slotted into place. The Hayeses thought my family was secretly wealthy. Why? Because for the past 4 years, I had been anonymously funneling money to my parents through Astra Hospitality. Every month, a substantial payment arrived to cover the mortgage, utilities, and medical expenses. I never put my name on it. I wanted no gratitude, no questions, just to help from a distance. But my parents didn't know it was me. And naturally, my mother had decided that the only possible benefactor was her golden son, Spencer. Of course she did. I could practically hear her bragging about Spencer's secret successful investments, how he always took care of his family, the sacrifices I made, the money I sent, the effort I put in. And Spencer got the credit. The Hayeses did their research. They saw a sizable family home with no visible debt. They heard Lillian's endless boasts about Spencer's supposed success. They concluded the Reed family had hidden wealth, likely a trust or liquid investment account. And like sharks smelling blood, they targeted Spencer. But their fatal flaw was that the money wasn't Spencer's. There was no family fortune. The Hayeses were chasing a mirage, an illusion I had inadvertently created. And when they discovered the truth, they would abandon Spencer instantly, leaving him heartbroken and my parents financially exposed and publicly humiliated. A small, bitter part of me wanted to let it happen. Let them all face the consequences of their dismissive choices. My mother, who gave away my inheritance. My brother, who never once stood up for me. Let them feel what it's like to be discarded and overlooked. But I couldn't. Despite the decades of pain, they were still my family. Spencer was still the boy who taught me how to drive stick shift in our old beat-up truck, even if he'd forgotten that version of me. Lillian was still the woman who stayed up all night when I had the flu. Family is infuriatingly complicated. You can love them and be furious with them at the same time. You can want to protect them even when they don't deserve it. I had to stop this. I was going to expose the Hayeses, save my family from a disaster they couldn't even see coming. And I was going to do it my way, on my turf. I found Julian Vance near the service entrance, clipboard in hand. He looked up, his professional facade briefly cracking into genuine concern. Ms. Reed, Audrey, he corrected himself quickly. Is everything all right? I told him I needed a favor. I needed a complete, deep-dive background check on the Hayes family, business filings, court records, news archives, everything. Julian, the consummate professional, simply nodded, didn't ask a single follow-up question, and disappeared with his phone already in hand. I returned to the party, trying to appear normal, which was becoming increasingly difficult. That's when Vivian found me. She appeared beside me like a designer-dressed phantom, her smile so sickly sweet it could induce a coma. We should chat, just the two of us, she cooed, guiding me toward a secluded alcove near the restrooms. The moment we were out of earshot, the sweetness vanished. Her eyes hardened. I know about you, she stated flatly. She claimed to know I sent money home every month, playing the dutiful daughter from afar. But here's what's confusing, she continued, leaning closer. Why would someone who can barely afford their own life send money to a family that doesn't even like them? Unless, she paused for effect, you're trying to buy their love, trying to prove you're worth something. It's pathetic, really. She then added that Spencer had told her everything. How I was always jealous, how I couldn't handle not being the favorite, and how the family only tolerated me out of pity. She patted my arm like I was a sick child. I'm going to marry Spencer and become part of this family. And honestly, it would be better for everyone if you just stayed away. Nobody will miss the dead weight. Then she walked away, her smile sharp and cruel once more. I stood there, momentarily stunned. Vivian thought I was broke, pathetic, and only valuable as a symbol of Spencer's success. The money came from Spencer in her mind. It was an astonishing level of arrogance, like a person bragging about their leased car to the CEO of the manufacturing company. Julian materialized at my elbow, startling me. He handed me a slim manila folder, his face unusually pale. You need to see this, he murmured. They're not just in debt. They're being investigated for federal fraud. I opened the folder right there in the hallway. Financial statements, court filings, articles about a series of failed real estate ventures. The Hayeses weren't just wealthy socialites. They were running a sophisticated multi-state Ponzi scheme. Their real estate empire was a facade built on lies and stolen investor money. They were 6 months away from total collapse and federal indictment. This wedding was their emergency exit strategy. They planned to marry into the liquid capital of the Reeds, shore up their reputation, and then disappear. But they had targeted a family who had nothing, save for the silent, carefully managed success of their outcast daughter. I walked to my car in the parking garage, needing total privacy to read the damning documents. Victor and Penelope Hayes had been operating a textbook Ponzi scheme for years, paying early investors with money collected from later ones. The house of cards was crumbling fast. Investors were demanding answers. Auditors were closing in. The wedding to Spencer was intended to buy them time and cash. When they realized the Reed capital was a phantom, they'd abandoned Spencer without a second thought. Part of me screamed to let them face the consequences. But the other part, the stubborn, protective part, refused. I loved my family, even if they had consistently failed to love me back properly. I was going to expose the Hayeses. My first call was to my lawyer, Stella Quinn, who answered on the second ring, as I expected. I summarized the situation and sent her the contents of Julian's folder, asking for immediate verification. Next, I called Tamsin Bell, the forensic accountant I trusted implicitly. I sent her key documents and asked her to dig deeper, specifically looking for past identities or patterns. Tamsin called back in less than 40 minutes, her voice vibrating with the excitement of a massive discovery. It's a textbook Ponzi, Audrey, you're right, she said. But look up the Hayes name in Arizona 3 years ago. Same scheme, different victims, different names. The bride's name wasn't Vivian Hayes. She was using the name Veronica Stone. Tamsin confirmed that Victor and Penelope weren't even her biological parents. They were long-term partners in a decade-long con, constantly cycling through new identities and new targets. I sat in my car, the folder heavy in my lap, and I started to laugh. It was a cold, quiet sound. Veronica Stone, Vivian Hayes, probably Stephanie next year. They had more identities than a spy novel. My phone buzzed. A text from Spencer. He wanted to talk. He said something about Vivian felt wrong, that he needed to discuss it. I checked the time. 8:55 p.m. Victor Hayes was scheduled to make his big toast at 9 o'clock. Too little, too late, big brother. You should have listened to that feeling years ago. But he was finally seeing the cracks. I quickly texted back. We'll talk after the toast. Just wait. I got out of the car, the folder now tucked securely under my arm. I walked back toward the Grand Astoria with a new lethal energy. Before, I was the invisible sister. Now, I was the architect of the evening's destruction. Julian met me near the service entrance. He was watching the Hayeses with an almost professional fascination. I told him I needed the AV system ready. During Victor's toast at 9 p.m., we are going to give the guests a presentation they will never forget. I handed him a USB drive. On it were the scanned court records, the financial statements, Tamsin's damning report, and photos of Veronica Stone from 3 years ago. I told him when Victor started talking, I wanted it all on the massive projection screens behind the stage. Every lie, Every document, every identity. Julian took the drive with a slight, appreciative smile. I always knew working for you would be interesting, Audrey. But this is a new level. He disappeared toward the control room. My phone buzzed with confirmation from Stella. Everything Tamsin found was accurate. More importantly, she had spoken to the lead investigator, Agent Jenna Cole, who had been hunting the Hayes for months. Agent Cole and her team were already mobilizing and would be outside the hotel by 9:15, ready to move in once the public exposure was complete. The trap was set. I found a spot near the back of the ballroom, observing. Vivian was still working the crowd, the fake smile plastered on her face. Spencer was by her side, completely oblivious. Lillian was near the front, chatting earnestly with Penelope Hayes. Two mothers, one about to realize she had been played, the other about to realize she had pushed away the wrong daughter. 8:56 p.m. Victor Hayes was adjusting his tie near the stage. He looked confident, his mask firmly in place. I thought of Vivian's words. You're just the stinky backwater nobody. Nobody will miss the dead weight. That's the funny thing about people who underestimate you. They never see you coming. They're so busy looking down that they miss the moment you rise. 8:59 p.m. Victor stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. The music lowered. Guests turned, champagne glasses raised, ready for the ritual. I made eye contact with Julian. He gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. The screens behind the stage flickered, currently showing a pleasant slideshow of Spencer and Vivian. A happy lie. Victor cleared his throat and began. Good evening, everyone, he boomed, thanking them for celebrating this beautiful union. He talked about family, about legacy, about how honored the Hayeses were to join the Reed family. He raised his glass. To the happy couple. To love, to family, to forever. I pulled out my phone and sent Julian a single word. Now. The screens flickered again. The happy photos of the couple vanished, replaced by a document, official-looking, stamped with court seals and legal terminology. Victor's smile froze on his face. The document was a court filing from Arizona. A massive fraud investigation. And listed as a person of interest was the name Veronica Stone. A ripple of confusion went through the room. People squinted, trying to read the tiny text. Victor fumbled the microphone, his face instantly turning a terrible gray. There must be some mistake, he yelled, calling it a technical error, and shouting for the DJ to fix it. But the screens kept cycling. Another document. Financial records detailing the funneling of investor money. Then a headline about a real estate scam in Phoenix that had wiped out dozens of retirees' savings. Then the photos. A younger Veronica Stone, same eyes, standing next to Victor and Penelope under completely different names, at a completely different charity event. Vivian stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, her champagne glass trembling. For the first time all night, her mask was entirely gone. She looked terrified, raw. Spencer stared at the screens, then at Vivian, then back at the screens, his mind visibly racing. The doubts he'd harbored all evening suddenly forming a horrific picture of betrayal. Victor tried to shove his way through the crowd toward the exit, but two of my security staff subtly blocked his path. Penelope grabbed his arm, whispering frantic, panicked words. That's when I stepped forward. I walked through the suddenly parting crowd toward the stage, my boots clicking sharply on the polished marble. Every single eye in the room turned to me. The country girl, the nobody, the dead weight. Julian's calm, professional voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to introduce the owner of the Grand Astoria Hotel and CEO of Astra Hospitality. Please welcome Miss Audrey Reed. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's face went utterly white. Spencer's jaw actually dropped open. Even Vivian, consumed by panic, looked genuinely shocked. I reached the stage and gently took the microphone from Victor's limp hand. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice measured and calm. I apologize for the interruption, but I thought you should all know exactly who you were celebrating tonight. I gestured to the scrolling documents behind me. Victor and Penelope Hayes are not who they claim to be. Their real estate business is a fraud. Their wealth was stolen from innocent investors. And their daughter, Vivian Hayes, is actually named Veronica Stone, a con artist who has been running this exact scheme with her partners for over a decade. Vivian finally found her voice, a raw, piercing scream. You're lying. You jealous, pathetic nobody. You're making this up because you can't stand to see Spencer happy. Ismail Tahia. That's interesting, I said into the microphone. Did I also make up the federal investigation that has been following you for 2 years? And I'm curious, how could I have faked the fact that Agent Jenna Cole and her team from the FBI are currently waiting just outside this hotel? As if on cue, the ballroom doors opened. 4 people in dark suits walked in, badges prominently displayed, their expressions all business. Vivian's face crumbled. Victor tried to make a break for it, but made it barely 10 feet before Agent Cole intercepted him with a calm, firm hand on his shoulder. Victor Hayes, or whatever your current name may be, you are under arrest for wire fraud, investment fraud, and conspiracy. Penelope began to weep hysterically. Vivian, Veronica, whatever she was, turned to Spencer one last time, her voice desperate. Spencer, please. Are you really going to let your sister do this to us? We love each other. You have to believe me. Spencer looked at her for a long, agonizing moment. I could see the battle in his eyes. The woman he idealized versus the undeniable, scrolling evidence behind her head. Then he did the only thing he could. He stepped away from her. I don't even know who you are, he said, his voice quiet, broken but final. I don't know who any of you are. Vivian's desperation curdled into pure rage. She lunged toward me, screaming that I had ruined everything, that I was supposed to be a nobody, just the stinky country girl. Security staff caught her quickly. I leaned in close enough for only her to hear, my voice a low, chilling whisper. This stinky country girl owns the room you're standing in, pays the salary of the men escorting you out, and will sleep very well tonight knowing exactly who she is. They led her away still screaming, her designer dress wrinkled, her perfect composure destroyed, her entire meticulously constructed life collapsing with every step toward the door. I turned back to the stunned, silent crowd. Well, I said, gesturing to the elaborate buffet, the catering is already paid for, and it seems a shame to waste good food. The bar will remain open for anyone who cares to stick around. A wave of nervous, bewildered laughter rippled through the room. The DJ, bless his heart, started playing something cheerful and upbeat. The engagement party was officially over, but the night for everyone else was just beginning. The next hour was surreal. The Hayeses, all 3 of them, were escorted out in handcuffs while the remaining guests watched in fascinated silence. Veronica Stone went from future Mrs. Reed to future federal inmate in under 15 minutes, a personal best, even for a career con artist. Inside the ballroom, Spencer found me near the bar, looking like a man who had been hit by a truck. His eyes were red, his hands trembling. How did you know? He croaked, his voice cracking. How did you figure it out? I told him the truth. I listened. I watched. I paid attention. All the things I've been doing my entire life while everyone else ignored me. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the floor. Then, he said the words I thought I'd never hear. I'm sorry. Odi. I know that doesn't cover it. It doesn't cover years of treating you like an afterthought, of taking Mom's word over yours. But he was sorry. I studied his face, looking for the usual arrogance, but I saw only genuine, profound remorse. It's a start, Spencer, I told him. It's a start. Then my mother appeared. Lillian looked physically smaller, deflated, all her usual confident grandeur gone. She approached slowly, uncertainly. She started to say, I didn't know. But I stopped her. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen, bank records, transfer receipts, for years of payments to her mortgage, utility companies and medical providers, all from Astra Hospitality. You thought Spencer was supporting you, I said, letting the words hang in the stunned air. You bragged to everyone about your generous, successful son. It was me, Mom. It was always me. Lillian stared at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. Her mouth opened and closed silently several times. I told her I hadn't done it for thanks. I did it because they were my family, but she deserved to know the truth about who was actually there for her. Her eyes finally filled with tears, not the dramatic, performative kind, but real painful tears. Audrey, she whispered, saying my name like she was tasting it for the first time. Just then there was a small commotion. I saw Grandma's locket, lying on the marble floor near where Vivian had been restrained. Spencer walked over and carefully picked it up. He looked at it for a long, heavy moment, then walked back and placed the antique silver locket directly into my hand. "This was always supposed to be yours," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know Mom gave it away. I'm sorry." The weight of the locket in my palm felt right, a physical reminder of a promise finally fulfilled. Lillian watched the exchange, silent tears tracing paths through her makeup. She finally said, "I was so wrong about everything." I didn't disagree, but I didn't need to pile on. There would be time for that later. For now, I was just tired. I shrugged, signaled the DJ to keep the music playing, and walked toward the quiet corner of the bar. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my top-floor office at the Grand Astoria, looking out at the city skyline. The sun was streaming through the windows, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a deep, settled peace. The Hayes/Stone crew was finished. Federal prosecutors had enough evidence to charge them with everything from money laundering to conspiracy. Veronica Stone was in custody, awaiting trial. Her bail set so high that even her fake wealthy parents couldn't afford it. The story made the local news for about a week. Hotel mogul exposes con artists at family engagement party. One headline, a glorious bitter stroke of poetry, read, "The stinky country girl who bought the ballroom." I had that one framed. It hangs in my office now, right where I can see it every morning, my personal coat of arms. Spencer came to visit the hotel yesterday. It was the first time he had seen my office, my staff, the immense, detailed life I had built entirely without his or my mother's help. He walked around, touching the mahogany, staring out the window, clearly struggling to reconcile the dead-weight sister with the CEO of Astra Hospitality. "I spent years thinking I knew who you were," he admitted quietly. "I was wrong about everything." I told him we had a lot of years to make up for. "Maybe we should start now," I suggested. We went to lunch, a real, two-person meal where we talked about our childhood, our parents, and all the things we never said. It wasn't a miracle, but it was honest, and that was more than we had ever had before. My mother started therapy last week. She called to tell me, her voice small and uncertain, so different from the woman who used to crush my spirit with a glance. She said she needed to understand why she treated me the way she did, and that she wanted to be better. I told her I appreciated the effort. We would take it slow. Rebuilding trust takes time, but at least we were finally building something instead of watching it crumble. This morning, I was hosting a business breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Investors, partners, people discussing expansion opportunities. A young woman walked in looking nervous. She was simply dressed, her hair pulled back, her eyes wide as she took in the elegant room, clearly feeling out of place. One of my investors, a man named Howard, who had too much money and zero manners, made a comment loud enough for everyone to hear. "Who let her in?" he muttered. "This is a private event." I stood up from the table. I walked over to the young woman and extended my hand. "Jasmine Torres," I said warmly. "I'm so glad you could make it." I led her back to the table, ignoring Howard's suddenly fixed stare at his coffee cup. "Everyone," I announced, placing my hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "I want you to meet the recipient of this year's Astra Hospitality Scholarship." Jasmine grew up in a small town in rural Ohio, worked 2 jobs to get through community college, and will start at Cornell's hotel management program this fall. The room went silent. I led Jasmine to a seat at my table, the same table as the investors, the same table as the men who thought they were better than her because of their birthright. She whispered a choked thank you. "Don't thank me yet," I told her. "The real work is just starting. But if you ever feel like you don't belong somewhere, remember this. The people who built the most beautiful things usually started with nothing but stubbornness and dreams." I stood in the lobby later that morning, watching guests come and go, business people, tourists, families. All of them walking on floors I owned, sleeping in beds I paid for, completely unaware of the woman who made it all possible. And that was perfectly fine. I didn't need their acknowledgement. People will always try to make you feel small for where you came from. Let them. While they're busy looking down on you, they won't see you rising up. I learned that lesson a long time ago. I carried it with me through years of doubt and struggle. And now here I stood, in the heart of everything I built. The stinky country girl. She smelled success coming from a mile away.